The camera clicked before Mara Voss even looked up. Through the cafe window, through the steam rising off her cup, a man in a gray coat, lens pointed straight at her table, no shame on his face at all. She froze with the teapot halfway to her cup. Tuesday. Her one quiet hour. Her one battered paperback, spine cracked from 100 readings, sitting open at the same page it always sat open at, because she never actually finished the chapter. She just liked being there. The bell above the door rang before she could decide whether to be afraid. A woman walked in wearing a coat the color of wet slate, and the whole shop seemed to lean toward her without meaning to. Every chair, every shadow. The photographer outside lowered his camera and backed away like he'd been slapped. The woman sat down across from Mara without asking. "You're going to want to hear this before he takes another picture," she said. "And you're going to want to say yes before the coffee gets cold." Mara set the teapot down very carefully, the way you set down something breakable when your hands have started to shake. "I don't know you. Cordelia Ashworth Kent." The woman said it like a fact of nature, not an introduction. "My son is the Duke, and in 6 days, a magazine is going to publish a story that will end him. Not his money, not his title, him. That's not my problem. It could be your solution." Outside, the photographer had found a better angle. Mara could feel the lens even through the glass, a small cold pressure on the side of her face. "I need a fiancé," Cordelia said, fast, convincing. "Someone with nothing to lose and nothing to gain by talking. You fit both. You don't know anything about me. I know your father owes this estate 11 years of debt he can't pay. I know you close this shop every Tuesday at 4, so no one can watch you fail to finish that book. I know exactly how much nothing you have to lose." The words landed like small stones. Mara didn't flinch. She'd had a lifetime of practice not flinching. "Get out." 6 weeks, Cordelia said, standing, smoothing her coat. "Maybe 8, a public engagement. A private contract, and when it's done, your father's debt disappears, and so do I." She left a card on the table, face down, like a dare. Mara didn't touch it for 11 minutes. She counted them. Then she flipped it over and dialed the number before she'd decided to. The estate looked like it had been built by people who didn't believe in doors, only entrances. Mara stood in a hallway wider than her whole shop, holding her own elbows so her hands would have something to do besides shake. "He doesn't know the details yet," Cordelia said, walking fast. "He knows there's a woman coming. He doesn't know why you, specifically." Comforting. "He isn't a monster. He's just been raised by people who confused control with love. Try not to take it personally." The room she led Mara into was too large for 2 people and 1 long table. Julian Ashworth Kent stood at the far end of it, like the space had been built around him, and not the other way around. He didn't come closer. "So you're the solution," he said, flat, not a question. "I'm a person," Mara said, "with a name. I know your name. My mother's briefed me on your name, your shop, your father's debts, and your favorite chapter of a novel you refuse to finish. What I don't know is why you'd agree to this." "I haven't agreed to anything yet." Something in his face shifted, just barely, the way water shifts before it decides to boil or freeze. "Then let's discuss terms," he said. "Before you do something we'll both regret." They sat at opposite ends of the table, a contract between them, like a border neither wanted to cross first. 6 months, public engagement, private truth, no real feelings, no real touching, beyond what photographs required. An exit clause for both of them, buried in language dry enough to disguise how much it would actually cost either one to use it. Mara signed her name and felt, for one strange second, like she was signing away something she hadn't known she still had. Julian signed his without looking up. "One more thing," he said, sliding the pen away. "Don't fall for the performance. It isn't real, and I won't apologize twice for reminding you." "Wasn't planning to," Mara said, and meant it, the way people mean things right before the universe decides to prove them wrong. The first gala arrived faster than either of them wanted. Mara stood at the top of a staircase in a dress that cost more than a year of her shop's rent, and Julian offered his arm like it was a chore assigned to him, which, technically, it was. Cameras exploded the second they reached the bottom step. "Smile like you mean it," he muttered. "I am smiling." "That's your smile that means it?" "That's my smile, that's deciding whether to bite you." Something almost like amusement crossed his face, gone before it could be photographed. The room was full of people who had opinions about both of them and no interest in facts. Mara navigated it the way she navigated an overdue rent notice, chin up, voice light, panic folded small enough to fit in a coat pocket. A woman detached herself from the crowd like she'd been waiting for the exact right moment. Lady Priscilla Hume, golden hair, colder eyes, a smile built for exactly this kind of room. "Julian," she said his name like a shared secret, "and you must be the shop girl." "Bookshop," Mara said. "There's tea, too." Priscilla's smile didn't move. "How charming. He does love a project." "Priscilla," Julian said, a warning folded into 2 syllables. "I'm only saying hello to the woman wearing what should have been my ring." She looked at Mara's hand, empty of anything but nerves. "Oh, not even that yet. How informal." She drifted away before anyone could answer her, leaving behind the kind of silence that has teeth. "Ignore her," Julian said. "Is that what you do?" He didn't answer, and the not answering told her more than any answer could have. By midnight, the gala had thinned to its last determined guests, and Mara found herself on a back staircase, shoes in one hand, laughing so hard at something absurd he'd said about the ambassador's toupee that she nearly missed a step. He caught her elbow before she fell. Neither of them let go right away. "This isn't part of the contract," she said, breath still uneven from laughing. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." For one unguarded second, he looked at her like she was the only unscripted thing in a life built entirely from scripts. Then a door opened 2 floors down, and they broke apart like the staircase had caught fire, and neither one mentioned it again, though both of them thought about it a great deal more than either would admit. The announcement went out 3 days later, faster than Mara had time to prepare for. A single photograph. Julian's hand at her back, her chin lifted, both of them dressed like people who had never once argued over who got the last word in a car ride. The caption called it a whirlwind romance. Nobody printed the word contract, because nobody outside 3 people in the entire city knew that word applied. Mara's father called her the same evening, his voice thin over the phone the way it had been thin for years, ever since the business failed and the apologies started outweighing the conversations. "Is it true?" he asked. "The Duke, are you really—" "It's complicated, Dad." "That's not an answer." She sat on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear, and told him the smallest true thing she could manage. "I'm going to be all right, and so are you. The debt's being handled." Silence stretched long enough that she thought the call had dropped. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, quiet, ashamed in the specific way only a parent can be ashamed in front of a child who has just quietly cleaned up a mess that was never hers to clean. "Whatever this is, whatever you agreed to, you didn't owe me that." "I know," Mara said. "I did it anyway." She didn't tell him about the contract's exact terms, or the 6 months, or the man on the other end of it, whose laugh she'd already started collecting reasons to hear. Some things, she decided, belonged to her alone for a little longer. What she didn't know, hanging up that night, was that a car had idled outside her shop for 11 minutes earlier that same afternoon. Engine running, a man behind the wheel who wasn't a customer and wasn't a reporter either, simply watching, patient, unhurried, the way people watch something they intend to use later. Priscilla Hume had already started building her case before the ink on the engagement announcement had even dried. The weeks that followed had a rhythm neither of them expected. Mara learned that Julian took his coffee black and his tea with exactly 1 sugar, no more, no less. a precision that seemed to matter to him more than it should have. She learned he went quiet, actually quiet, jaw tight and eyes somewhere else, whenever anyone mentioned his father, and that the quiet lasted longer if the mention was public. She learned to fill that silence without asking him to explain it. He learned things too, that she kept her late mother's ring in her coat pocket instead of on her hand, because some things weren't for cameras. That she still hadn't finished that paperback, not because she couldn't, but because finishing it felt like closing a door she wasn't ready to close. That her laugh had two settings, the polite one for rooms full of strangers, and the real one, lower, unguarded, that she didn't seem to know she had. He started trying to earn the second one on purpose. "You're doing that thing again," she said one evening, in the estate's smaller sitting room, the one with a fire that Cordelia insisted on keeping lit, even in mild weather. "What thing?" "Being funny. Deliberately." "I'm not being funny. I'm being accurate. The ambassador's toupee genuinely does have its own weather system." That got the real laugh. He looked entirely too pleased with himself for a man who claimed none of this was real. Cordelia watched all of it from doorways, saying nothing, though the corner of her mouth had started doing something suspiciously like hope. Not everyone was pleased. Priscilla Hume had a talent for arriving exactly where she wasn't wanted, dressed exactly right, timed exactly wrong. She found Mara alone in a hallway during a charity dinner, 2 weeks into the arrangement, and closed the distance between them like she was closing in on something wounded. "You do know this ends," Priscilla said. "Contracts always end, and when his does, he comes back to people like me, people who understand what he actually is." "And what's that?" "Obligated. Bred for it. You're a nice distraction, but distractions have expiration dates." She smiled, all teeth, no warmth. "I'd enjoy watching you find that out." Mara didn't answer. She'd learned, over a childhood of watching her father lose everything slowly and publicly, that some people only wanted a reaction, and the fastest way to disarm them was to refuse to give one. She walked away instead, spine straight, hands steady, and didn't let herself shake until she found an empty room. Julian found her there 10 minutes later. "She got to you." "She didn't get anywhere. You're standing very still for someone who wasn't affected." Mara turned around, and whatever composure she'd rebuilt slipped a little at the look on his face, careful and furious in a way that wasn't performance, that had nothing to do with cameras or contracts. "She's not wrong," Mara said. "This does end. That's not the same as her being right about anything else. Isn't it?" He crossed the room in 3 steps, close enough that she had to tilt her head to hold his eyes. "I don't know what I am half the time," he said. "Obligated, bred for it." Maybe she's correct about all of that, but I know the difference between a performance and this conversation, and this one isn't for anyone watching. Nobody was watching. That was the strange part. For the first time since the contract began, there wasn't a single camera in the room, and neither of them moved anyway. The charity dinner's photographer found them 20 minutes later, arranged properly, engagement ready, smiling the practice smiles that made the front page the next morning, under a headline calling them the season's most convincing romance. Convincing was the word that stuck in Mara's chest all week. 3 weeks in, the arrangement had its first real test. A journalist named Grace Whitfield, sharp-eyed and unimpressed by titles, cornered Mara outside a charity auction with a question dressed up as small talk. "How did you two actually meet? The official story's a little thin." "Thin how?" "Thin like it was written by a lawyer instead of lived by 2 people. Grace smiled, not unkindly, but not backing down either. "I've covered 3 of his mother's arrangements before. I know what one smells like." Mara's pulse picked up, but her face didn't move. "Then you already know how this goes," she said. "You publish a guess, we deny it, and everyone moves on by Thursday. Or I publish proof instead of a guess. Do you have any?" Grace held her gaze a beat too long. "Not yet." She walked off into the crowd, and Mara stood there with her heart going too fast, replaying the word yet like it was a countdown clock. She told Julian that night, in the back seat of a car neither of them had asked to be alone in. "She's fishing," he said, though his jaw had gone tight in the way she now recognized as worry-wearing armor. "She's good at fishing. She knows the water. Then we give her nothing to catch. We've been giving her nothing for weeks, and she's still circling." He was quiet for a moment, city lights sliding gold and blue across his face through the window. "My mother built this whole arrangement to save my reputation," he said. "I keep wondering what happens if it does the opposite instead." "Then it fails," Mara said, "and we go back to our separate, considerably less complicated lives." The words felt like a lie even as she said them, and from the look he gave her, he'd heard the lie too, and neither of them corrected it. The gala circuit rolled on, relentless, glittering, exhausting in ways no one warned Mara about. She learned to sleep in cars between events, learned which smile photographed best from the left, learned the particular ache of being watched constantly by people who had already decided what her story meant before she'd lived a single day of it. She also learned, without meaning to, the shape of Julian's actual laugh, the one that came out low and surprised, like it had escaped him against his will. She started collecting reasons to hear it. He started noticing when she did. "You're doing it on purpose," he said one night, after she'd spent 10 minutes describing his mother's dog's ongoing feud with the topiary garden. "Doing what?" "Trying to make me laugh." "Is it working?" "Unfortunately." They were sitting on the terrace steps, shoes off, the party still going on behind them through glass doors neither had bothered to close properly. For a moment, the whole performance of the last 3 weeks fell away, and what was left was just two people who'd started, somewhere in the noise, to actually like each other. "This is the part where the contract says we stop," Mara said quietly. "I'm aware. So, we should probably stop." "Probably," he agreed, and neither of them moved an inch. The masquerade was Cordelia's idea, and Cordelia's ideas always came with strings attached. One night, she told Mara, fastening a string of pearls at her neck with hands steadier than Mara's own. "Every donor who matters will be there, every reporter who matters too. If we can survive this evening without a single crack showing, the engagement stops being a rumor people question and starts being a fact people accept." "No pressure then?" "None at all," Cordelia said, and the corner of her mouth twitched in a way that meant the exact opposite. The mask Mara wore was silver, feathered at the edges, and it did nothing to hide the way her stomach turned over when Julian appeared at the top of the stairs in black, a matching mask pushed up on his forehead like he'd already decided not to hide from her tonight. "You look like you're about to commit a crime," he said, offering his arm. "I feel like I'm about to commit several." The ballroom below was a forest of masks and secrets, candlelight instead of chandeliers, music with too many violins in it. Mara had gotten good at these rooms. She moved through them now like she'd been born to it, laughing at the right moments, deflecting the wrong questions, letting Julian's hand rest at the small of her back like it belonged there. It was working. That was the dangerous part. It was working too well. She excused herself near midnight to find a quiet corner and catch her breath, and that was when a man, in a plain black mask, unremarkable among 100 elaborate ones, fell into step beside her. Miss Voss. Not a question. He knew exactly who she was underneath the silver feathers. A word. "Do I know you?" "Edmund Price. I do research for people who prefer not to be named." He said it pleasantly, like he was discussing the weather. "Lady Hume hired me 3 weeks ago. I found something you'll want to know about before she does anything with it." Mara's chest went cold under the borrowed jewelry. "What did you find?" "The real contract. Not the version leaked to the press already. The actual signed terms, exit clauses included. Somebody in the estate's legal office isn't as loyal as the Duchess believes." He handed her a folded card with a number on it, nothing else. "I sell information. Tonight, I'm selling you a warning instead, free of charge. Consider it a professional courtesy. since you seem like the only honest person in this entire arrangement." He melted back into the crowd before she could ask another question, leaving her standing very still in a hallway full of laughter that suddenly sounded far away. She found Julian 20 minutes later, mid-conversation with a donor twice his age, and pulled him aside with a smile that cost her everything she had left. "We need to talk now. Can it wait?" "No." Something in her voice made him excuse himself immediately, no argument, and follow her into an empty study off the main hall, the party's noise muffled through the door like it belonged to another building entirely. "The actual contract," she said. "The real one, the exit clauses, all of it. Someone's leaked it. Priscilla has it. Or she will soon." Julian went very still. "How do you know this?" "A man in a mask told me. Called himself Edmund Price. Said he does research for people who don't want to be named." "That's Hume's man. She's used him before." Julian's hand went to his jaw. A habit she'd learned meant he was calculating something too large to say out loud yet. "If she has the real terms, she has everything. The debt clause. Your father's name. Every reason you agreed to this in language that reads exactly like what it was. A transaction. Yes." The word sat between them, ugly and accurate, and for a moment, neither of them could look at the other directly. "If it comes out," Mara said quietly, "it won't just be your reputation that ends. It'll be mine, and my father's. Everyone will know exactly why I said yes. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that." "I know." His voice had gone rough at the edges, honest in a way the last month of practiced smiles hadn't allowed. "I can't promise the contract stays buried. I can only promise that whatever happens next, I'm not going to let you go through it as someone I hired." Something in his face, unguarded, uncertain, made the room feel smaller than it was. "Julian, I know what the terms say." He stepped closer, close enough that the candlelight from the hallway caught the mask still pushed up on his forehead. "No real feelings, no real touching beyond what the cameras need. I signed that clause myself." "You did. I want to break it." Mara's heart did something complicated and immediate, somewhere between panic and relief. "That's not part of the arrangement," she said, "but it came out softer than a refusal should." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He kissed her then. No camera in sight, no performance required, and it wasn't careful the way the staircase kiss had been. It was certain. It was the kind of kiss that answered a question neither of them had been brave enough to ask out loud. When they broke apart, her hand was fisted in the front of his jacket, and his forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing like they'd run somewhere instead of standing still. "That," she said, "was extremely unprofessional." "Deeply," he agreed, and didn't step back. The morning after the masquerade, Cordelia summoned them both to her study, and for once, there was no polish in her voice at all. "Edmund Price," she said, sliding a photograph across the desk. A man in a plain black mask, caught mid-conversation with Priscilla Hume in a corridor no guest should have had reason to use. My security chief recognized him from an old case. He's not simply a researcher, he's the man who dug up the scandal that ended the Faircross marriage 2 years ago. Whatever he's found on us, he doesn't hand over warnings for free unless he's already decided he'll profit twice. "Meaning," Julian said. "Meaning he may have already sold pieces of this to more than one buyer," Cordelia said. "Priscilla isn't the only fire we need to put out. She may not even be the biggest one." Mara felt the floor of her confidence shift another inch. So the contract could already be circulating. Not yet. If it were, we'd know. Reporters like Grace Whitfield don't sit on stories that large without at least one confirming call. Cordelia's hands were folded very still on the desk, the stillness of someone working hard not to show fear. "But we should assume the clock is shorter than we'd like. Then we get ahead of it," Julian said. "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not spending the next 4 months waiting for someone else to decide when my life becomes a headline." He looked at Mara as he said it, and she understood, without either of them needing to say it aloud, that the plan forming behind his eyes would cost him something with his mother, something with the family name, long before it cost anyone else anything at all. The break-in happened 4 nights later, while the masquerade's aftermath was still dying down in the papers. Mara had gone back to her shop to collect a few things, the smallest errand imaginable, and found the back door already open, the lock scraped and forced, papers from her small office desk scattered across the floor like something had been searched for and not found. Her hands shook, dialing Julian's number. "Someone's been in my shop. Are you hurt?" His voice came sharp and immediate, no formality left in it at all. "No, but they went through everything. My desk, my files, my father's old paperwork." She swallowed hard. "They were looking for something specific. I'm sending security. Don't touch anything else. I'm coming myself." He arrived faster than the estate's usual 30-minute drive should have allowed, coat half-buttoned, hair still damp from a shower he clearly hadn't finished, and the fear on his face when he saw her standing whole and unhurt in the doorway told her more than any declaration at the masquerade had. "They didn't find what they wanted," Mara said, once the police had come and gone, once the shop had been swept for anything worse than a search. "My father's debt records were in a lockbox at the bank, not here. They were looking for leverage. They already have leverage. The contract. Then they were looking for more." Julian's jaw was tight enough to ache. Priscilla isn't just trying to embarrass us anymore. She's building a case. For what? For making sure whatever happens next, it happens on her terms, not ours. Mara sat down slowly on the edge of her own overturned desk, the shop she'd built out of nothing suddenly feeling very fragile around her. "I didn't sign up for this," she said. "The lying to reporters, I could manage. The lying to your mother's donor friends, fine. But someone breaking into my shop because of a fake engagement. It's not fake anymore." Julian crouched in front of her, taking both her hands like he needed the anchor as much as she did. "Not to me. I know that doesn't undo any of this. I know it might even make it worse. But I need you to know it before whatever's coming actually comes." Mara looked at him, at the fear still sitting behind his eyes, at the honesty that hadn't been part of any contract either of them had signed. "I know," she said quietly. "That's the problem. I know exactly how real it's become, and I still don't know if that's going to be enough." Neither of them had an answer for that. They sat together on the floor of a ransacked bookshop until the sun came up, holding on to something that had stopped being a performance days ago and started being the one thing in either of their lives they were genuinely afraid to lose. Priscilla Hume called a meeting the way other people called in favors, with absolute confidence that no one would refuse her. She chose the estate's library, dark wood and old money, and arranged herself in a chair like she already owned the room. Julian stood by the window, arms crossed, and Mara stood near the door, close enough to leave, if leaving became necessary. "I have the contract," Priscilla said. "No preamble at all. The real one. Debt clause, exit terms, the exact figure the Duchess offered for a convincing performance. I have copies in 3 separate locations, in case anyone was considering something dramatic." "What do you want?" Julian said. "Marriage." She said it like she was ordering dinner. "To me, obviously. The engagement ends quietly. The shopgirl returns to her books, and the story that runs is a reconciliation, not a scandal. Everyone keeps their reputation, everyone except her, but she was never going to keep hers anyway, not with a father's debts hanging over her name. You'd blackmail an entire family over a wedding." "I'd correct a mistake," Priscilla said. "You were promised to me for 2 years before your mother panicked and bought a substitute. I'm simply collecting." Mara felt the room tilt slightly, the way it does when a threat stops being theoretical. "And if we refuse," she said. "Then by Friday, every paper in the city runs the actual contract, word for word, your father's debts, the exact sum it took to buy your cooperation, the exit clause, you'll both use eventually anyway, once the 6 months run out, and you go back to being strangers who once shared a very expensive lie." Priscilla stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'd rather not do that. It's ugly, and I don't enjoy ugly things. But I will, if I have to." She left without waiting for an answer, the door closing behind her with a soft, final click. Before Priscilla had even reached her car, a second problem arrived at the estate's front gate, in the form of 6 reporters, Grace Whitfield among them, drawn by a tip that something was happening inside the library that afternoon. "We can't let them see us rattled," Julian said, watching the gate through the window, cameras already lifting toward the house. "They'll see whatever we show them," Mara said. "The only choice is what that is." They walked out together, because hiding would have said more than any statement could. Grace pushed to the front of the small crowd, notebook lowered, eyes sharp. "There are rumors a contract exists," she said. "Real terms, not the official story. Care to comment before someone less careful than me runs with it?" Julian's hand found Mara's, steady, deliberate, in full view of every lens pointed at them. "When we're ready to say something, you'll hear it from us first," he said. "Not from whoever's selling rumors this week. Is that a confirmation there's something to say?" "It's a promise you'll get the truth eventually," Mara said, "which is more than most people in this city bother offering you at all." Grace studied them both a moment longer, then nodded once, something like respect passing over her face, and didn't push further, though her eyes stayed sharp all the way back to her car. It bought them an afternoon, not more than that. Cordelia arrived within the hour, summoned by a call from Julian that had contained exactly 4 words. She listened to the whole account, standing very still by the fireplace, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost the polish it usually carried. "This is my doing," she said. "All of it." "Mother, let me finish, Julian, before I lose whatever courage I've gathered to say this." She looked at Mara directly, something raw showing through the composure, for the first time since the bookshop. "I didn't hire you only to save his reputation. I want to be honest, finally, since honesty seems to be the only thing left that might help. I watched my son disappear into duty for years, meetings, obligations, a fiancé chosen for bloodlines instead of warmth. I saw you laugh at him in that bookshop before you even knew who he was, over nothing, over a silly comment I don't even remember making, and I thought, that's what he's missing. I built this whole arrangement not just to protect him from scandal, but because I wanted him to remember what it felt like to be liked for no strategic reason at all. You used my father's debt to manipulate me into an experiment," Mara said, quieter than she felt. "Yes," Cordelia admitted, "I did. And I am not going to insult you by pretending that was fair." Julian had gone very quiet through all of it, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge Mara hadn't heard from him before, not even at his coldest. "So none of this was actually about protecting me from anything," he said. "It was an engineered rescue mission, and I was the patient who never consented to the surgery. Julian, you built my life again," he said, turning to his mother, "the same way you've always built it, different room, same architecture, choosing who I'd fall for, like you once chose who I'd marry." "That isn't fair to her," Cordelia said, gesturing at Mara. "None of what grew between you was engineered. I couldn't have forced that if I'd tried for a decade. But you tried anyway. The fight that followed wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was low, controlled, each sentence landing like something aimed rather than shouted, and somewhere in the middle of it, Julian turned that same controlled fury toward Mara without meaning to, the way people sometimes wound the person standing closest when the actual target has already left the room. "You knew," he said. "Some part of this, you must have known, was orchestrated." "I knew I was being paid to marry a stranger," Mara said, voice rising despite every effort not to let it. "I didn't know your mother was running some kind of emotional experiment on both of us. But you kept going, kept letting me believe this was real, while somewhere in the back of your mind, you were counting the 6 months down like a sentence. That's not fair." "None of this has been fair," he snapped. "Not from the very first cup of tea you never got to finish in peace." The words landed harder than either of them expected. Mara felt something in her chest go still and cold, the exact stillness she recognized from years of watching her father absorb one financial blow after another without letting his face show it. "You know what?" she said. "I think I finally understand what this actually was. Mara. A transaction." She said it clearly, deliberately, handing his own earlier words back to him like a returned gift. "That's what you called it, at the masquerade, before you decided to unsay it. Maybe you were right the first time. That's not what I meant, and you know it." "I don't know anything anymore," she said. "I know your mother built a lie to fix you, and I know you're furious with her, and I know somehow I'm the one standing here absorbing it." Julian opened his mouth to argue, and closed it again, and in the silence that followed, something between them cracked in a way that no staircase kiss or masquerade confession could immediately repair. "I should go," Mara said. "Don't. Give me one reason that isn't about the contract, or the press, or your mother's plan, or anything except the two of us in this room right now." He didn't answer fast enough. Grief has a way of stealing exactly the words a person needs most, right when they need them. Mara walked out of the library, past a Duchess too stunned to stop her, out through the wide hallway that had never once felt like it belonged to someone like her, and into a car she called herself, because for once, no one was waiting to arrange the ride for her. She didn't cry until she was 3 streets from her shop. Then she cried the way people cry when something they never expected to matter has, somehow, mattered more than almost anything else in their life. The days after moved slowly, the particular slowness of a life resuming its old shape after being interrupted by something bigger than itself. Mara reopened the shop, reshelved the same paperback in the same corner booth, brewed the same pot of tea on the same Tuesday, and found that all of it, every familiar motion, felt hollow in a way it hadn't before the Duchess ever walked through that door. The papers ran wild speculation for a week, a quiet separation, a reconciliation with Lady Hume that never quite happened, since Priscilla, for reasons no one outside the estate understood, never released the contract after all. Grace Whitfield published a careful piece hinting that something real had existed and something real had broken, without ever naming what either thing had been, a kindness Mara hadn't expected and appreciated more than she could say. Julian didn't call. Mara told herself that was fine. She told herself a great many things that week that weren't quite true. She kept her mother's ring in her coat pocket, same as always, and found herself, more than once, reaching for it during the quiet moments, turning it over between her fingers like a question she hadn't found the courage to ask herself yet. Priscilla Hume did not disappear quietly, and the peace of that first week ended the exact moment she decided to remind everyone why. She called Grace Whitfield herself this time, no masked researcher required, and offered the actual contract in exchange for one condition. The story had to run under Grace's byline, framed exactly as Priscilla wanted it framed, a scandal about a bought engagement and a family desperate enough to purchase affection for a broken heir. Grace, to her credit, called Julian before she called anyone else. "I'm not running this without confirming it," she told him over the phone, the estate's hallway swallowing his end of the silence whole. "But I need to know if it's true. All of it. The debt clause, the sum, the 6 months. If it's true, I can't sit on it forever. Not once she has 3 other outlets willing to publish it without the confirmation I'd insist on." Julian stood very still in that hallway for a long moment, staring at a family portrait that had never once looked like him. "It's true," he said finally, "every clause of it, but it isn't the whole story." "Then give me the whole story." He did. 2 days later, Mara was in the shop, mid-afternoon, sunlight falling in long gold bars across the floorboards, when the bell above the door rang, and she looked up expecting a customer and found, instead, Julian standing in the doorway like he wasn't entirely sure he was allowed inside. No cameras, no security, no mother arranging the moment from somewhere just out of sight. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, though her heart had already started doing something complicated at the sight of him. "I know. The papers said you and Priscilla. The papers are wrong, and they'll be corrected by tomorrow morning. because I gave Grace Whitfield the truth 2 days ago. The whole contract, the whole reason, all of it, before Priscilla could twist it into something uglier. Mara set down the teapot she'd been holding, very carefully, the way you set down something breakable when you don't trust your own hands. You told a reporter the truth. About the debt. About all of it. I told her everything except the part that was actually mine to protect, Julian said, stepping further into the shop, like each step cost him something. I didn't tell her about the staircase, or the masquerade, or the 4 nights I haven't slept properly since you walked out of that library. Those weren't hers to publish. Those were only ever ours. Julian, let me finish, because I've been rehearsing this since the moment you left, and if I stop now I might lose my nerve entirely. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion under his eyes, real and unphotographed. My mother built a plan to fix something in me she thought was broken. I let her, because I'd stopped believing anyone could actually want to be near me for reasons that weren't strategic. And then you sat across from me at a table you didn't ask to be dragged to, and you were funny and furious and completely unimpressed by every single thing I'd been taught to think mattered. That's not an apology. I'm getting to it. A small, unsteady laugh. I'm sorry I let my anger at my mother land on you, in that library, when none of it was ever your fault. I'm sorry I called something a transaction that stopped being 1 week before I admitted it out loud. And I'm sorry it took a blackmail attempt and a newspaper deadline for me to walk into a bookshop and say the only true thing I actually have left to offer you, which is that I don't want 6 months. I don't want an exit clause. I don't want any arrangement that has an ending built into it at all. Mara's eyes had gone bright, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the moment dissolve into something she couldn't remember clearly later. The contract's void, she said. Priscilla has it. It doesn't matter what either of us wants anymore, does it? It's already public. It ran an hour ago, Julian said. Grace's version. The true one. My mother's manipulation, my mistakes, your father's debt, all of it, printed exactly as it happened. No polish, no spin. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded page, offering it to her like evidence. Read the last line. Mara unfolded it with hands that weren't quite steady, scanning past paragraphs about contracts and debts and a duchess's desperate, misguided love for her son, until she reached the final sentence, printed plainly beneath Grace Whitfield's byline. Whatever began as an arrangement between the Duke and Miss Voss appears, by every account available, to have become something considerably more honest than either party originally intended. She let you have the ending, Mara said quietly. I asked her to leave room for one, Julian said. I didn't know yet if I'd get to use it. Mara looked up at him, at the exhaustion and hope sitting together on his face in equal measure, and felt something in her chest finally loosen after a week of holding it too tightly. Priscilla, she said, what happens to her contract now, if the story's already out? It has no leverage left to sell, Julian said. You can't blackmail someone with a secret the whole city already knows. My mother's lawyers are handling the rest. Whatever she does next, it isn't our problem to carry. That's convenient timing. I've had a very motivated few days. Mara laughed. The real one, low and unguarded, the one she hadn't known she had until he'd started collecting reasons to hear it, and something in Julian's shoulders came down like a weight he'd been carrying since before either of them ever met. I still don't know what to call this, she admitted. It started as a lie. I don't know how to just believe it's not one anymore. Then don't believe it yet, Julian said. Just have tea with me. No contract, no cameras, no 6-month clock running somewhere in the background. Just this, today, and however many Tuesdays after it you're willing to let me sit in this booth beside you. Mara looked at the corner booth, the same worn cushions, the same paperback still open to the same unfinished chapter, and found, for the first time in years, that she didn't mind the idea of finally turning the page. One condition, she said, pouring a second cup without being asked. Name it. You learn to like Earl Grey. Properly. Not just tolerate it for the sake of appearances. I think, Julian said, sitting down across from her, in the exact spot where a duchess had once sat uninvited to change both their lives. I could manage that. Outside, the afternoon light kept moving across the shop windows, indifferent to headlines and contracts, and every calculation that had brought two strangers to this particular table. Inside, Mara reached into her coat pocket, closed her fingers around the ring she'd kept hidden there, through every gala, every masquerade, every quiet Tuesday spent waiting for a life she hadn't known she wanted yet. She didn't put it on, not that day. But for the first time since she'd started carrying it, she let it sit in her open palm instead of folded away in a pocket, resting on the table between 2 cups of tea, in plain sight of anyone who cared to look, no longer something she needed to hide. Julian noticed. He always noticed the things that mattered to her. He didn't reach for it. He simply smiled, small and certain, and poured them both another cup, and let the silence between them settle into something neither of them felt any need to fill. Her father visited the shop the following Sunday, something he hadn't done in months, hat in hand, apology already forming on his face before he'd even crossed the threshold. "I read the article," he said. "All of it. The debt, the reason you agreed, everything." "Dad, let me finish." He sat down across from her in the corner booth, the same one, the same worn cushions. "I spent years watching you carry things that should have been mine to carry. I'm not going to spend whatever years are left doing the same thing in reverse, pretending I don't see what you did for me." "I didn't do it just for you," Mara said gently. "It stopped being about the debt a long time before it ended." Her father looked at her for a long moment, something loosening in his face that had been tight for years. "Good," he said simply. "Then I only owe you one apology instead of 2. He left with a cup of tea he hadn't finished and a promise to come back the following Tuesday, an ordinary promise that meant more to both of them than either said out loud. Some stories end with a wedding. This one ended, quietly, with 2 cups of tea, an unfinished book finally worth finishing, and a corner booth that had, without either of them planning it, become the one place in either of their complicated lives that felt entirely, unmistakably real.